The storylines of Star Trek episodes aren't always wrapped up perfectly. Sometimes things are only implied to happen after the events of an episode, but never actually shown. In this video, we're going over the examples that stand out as particularly awkward. We're looking at creepy situations, embarrassing mistakes, ridiculous mission reports, and more things that would have been super uncomfortable for characters after the fact. When you look into the details, you'll realise that these things must have happened, which is unfortunate because some of our examples nearly ruin the episode they come from. With that being said, I am long-term editor, first-time presenter Tom Roberts-Finn, and this is 10 awkward things that must have happened after Star Trek episodes. Number 10. Barclay's soiled reputation. The holodeck is a brilliant invention, but, as we've learned many times before, it can be easily abused in some truly disturbing ways. In the Next Generation episode Hollow Pursuits, which you knew we'd have to talk about at some point, we got introduced to holo addiction. Lieutenant Reginald Barclay became so obsessed with holographic fantasies that he started completely avoiding real-world interaction and showing up late for work. Eventually, LaForge went looking for Barclay and walked in on him playing a holodeck program where he fought and demeaned holograms of his superior officers in a 17th century setting. LaForge tried to explain that it was weird to recreate real people on the holodeck and tried to help him out of his addiction. But it persisted, and he was soon caught in the act once again. This time, Riker, LaForge, and Troy all barged in to find the same program running and encountered the Goddess of Empathy, a sexualized recreation of Counselor Deanna Troi, who was madly in love with Barclay. They responded incredibly calmly, given how weird and invasive this program was. Regardless, it must have been hard for the three of them, especially Deanna, to walk past Barclay in the corridors after seeing all of that. Like Riker said, there should have really been some rules on the books against recreating real people on the holodeck. Maybe these rules were created later because of Barclay's creepy programs. Number 9. Archer's Cold Front Report. Cold Front was one of the most embarrassing moments in Captain Archer's career. This Enterprise episode revealed that crewman Daniels was actually a fighter in the temporal Cold War, originating from the 31st century. After the episode, Archer would have had to explain to Starfleet Command that not only was Daniels able to hide his identity and his futuristic technology, but he also claimed to be from the future, something that the Vulcans firmly believed was impossible at the time. Then, Daniels' future tech, the Temporal Observatory, and his phasing device were both destroyed, and Daniels was thought to have been killed, leaving no evidence for the story he gave. The Vulcan scientists and authorities were probably even more shocked than Starfleet to hear Archer's report. Their skepticism of time travel came up again later in the series, but the fact that Daniels was presumed killed before he could even face questioning must have made some Vulcans suspect foul play, or some sort of cover-up on Archer's behalf to hide the mistakes of Earth's most famous crew. Basically, it would have been pretty hard to convince anyone who wasn't there that the temporal war was real and the events of Cold Front actually happened. Number 8. The problem with the Doctor's daydreams. In the Voyager episode Tinker Tenor Dr. Spy, Seven and B'Elanna discovered a part of the Doctor's program that probably made life aboard the ship much more awkward. In the episode, the Doctor added a subroutine to his program that allowed him to daydream. Unfortunately, a hierarchy vessel tapped into his daydreams, causing them to become unpredictable and uncontrollable. In an effort to repair him, Torres routed his daydreams through the holodeck projectors, allowing herself, Janeway, Seven, and Kim to observe them for themselves. They got to see the Doctor playing out his fantasy of taking command of Voyager and saving the ship, but also some more personal desires. His other daydreams were of painting a nude erotically posed Seven of Nine and breaking up with B'Elanna, who cried that Tom Paris wasn't half the man the Doctor was. Seven of Nine seemed fairly unfazed by the Doctor's fantasies. She even gave him a small kiss at the end of the episode, explaining that it was purely platonic. But it was likely that things were pretty awkward between him and B'Elanna after she learned his feelings for her, and his jealousy for Paris. She may have even told Tom, which would really make for a weird dynamic whenever he assisted in sickbay. It also must have been a bit uncomfortable for B'Elanna to know that her physician had romantic feelings for her. Number 7. Picard readjusting to life on the Enterprise. Picard's been through a lot of awful shit in his life. His mother died when he was young, he was stabbed by a Nausicaan, tortured by the Cardassians, and assimilated by the Borg, to name but a few. Yet, the most traumatic moment in his life was probably the events of the Inner Light. In this episode, he lived an entire decade of a life that wasn't his, inside of an alien simulation. The ordeal only lasted a few minutes in reality, but for him it was a whole other life, and the show barely expanded on what this meant for him. Maybe the writers just figured Picard got enough therapy in the episode Family after the best of both worlds. Still, some time must have needed to pass before Picard was ready to captain the ship again. He probably spent a lot of time off duty to process what happened to him. He spent so long in the simulation that he likely forgot command codes, regulations, and maybe even some of his crew and friends. The very next episode is the dramatic two-parter time travel story Time's Arrow, so we can only hope that Picard had at least a few weeks to sit around and mentally recover before immediately going on to save all of humanity. Number 6. The Hide and Q report. After Hide and Q, it's doubtful that Starfleet Command would have approved of Riker giving up his Q powers so quickly. He could have done a lot of good for the Federation with those abilities. He could have cured any disease, invented new technology to defend the Federation, or practically anything else. Instead, he briefly played around with giving his friends their greatest desires, and then gave up on his powers when he realized they didn't actually want his help. Picard and Riker would have had to explain to Command that they gave up this huge opportunity simply because they thought that it was too much power for a human, and probably because Riker didn't want to risk change his identity. Number 5. The Trouble with Tribble Disposal. At the end of The Trouble with Tribbles, Scotty removed the Tribbles from the Enterprise by beaming them directly onto the Klingon ship. This was a bit messed up on a few levels. Besides the fact that this could have been enough to start a war, Scotty also condemned thousands of innocent creatures to gruesome, painful deaths. We know that the Klingons despise Tribbles, and an infestation of them would almost certainly lead to a bloodbath. The creatures would continue to multiply as they were hunted, and the Klingons would soon need to start taking them out faster and faster. Honestly, it would have been more humane to just beam the Tribbles right into space. Their deaths would have probably been quicker than at the hands of the Klingons, who aren't exactly known for their mercy. Number 4. Spock getting teased. Spock's friends on the Enterprise responded pretty maturely when they learned about Spock's Ponfar in the TOS episode Amok Time. They wouldn't mock him for something out of his control, no matter how strange the Vulcan mating rituals may seem to humans. However, at the end of the episode, when Spock realized that he didn't actually kill Captain Kirk, he let his emotions show for a moment, shouting Jim and smiling from pointed ear to pointed ear. He tried to play it off, but Kirk, McCoy and Nurse Chapel all saw what happened. Spock revealed in this moment that he cared deeply for his friend, Kirk, something that he rarely made clear with his words. It's not hard to imagine the three witnesses teasing Spock about his secret feelings. I know I would. Loser. Number 3. Interstellar Traffic Cops. We've talked a lot about the next-gen episode Force of Nature, which showed that warp travel was slowly damaging space. At the end of the episode, a speed limit of warp fire was put in place throughout Federation space, except in extreme emergencies. As we've gone over before, Starfleet never really followed this limit, and we never got any solution to the problem in canon. One thing we haven't really discussed was the fact that the Federation authorities would likely have to patrol their space to catch any civilian ships exceeding the speed limit, sort of like interstellar traffic cops. We can only imagine the outrage of civilian freighter captains who would almost certainly have their profits cut down because of the Warp 5 limit. Who knows, the damage could have been minimized with new technology sometime shortly after the episode, or Federation authorities may have continued to impose this speed limit on the civilians in their space, while allowing Starfleet to continually and blatantly ignore it. Number 2. The crew realizing Captain Freeman's mistake. We learned a lot about the Federation News Network in the Lower Decks episode Trusted Sources. An FNN reporter came aboard the Cerritos to do a story on its mission and crew during Project Swingby, a mission to return and offer assistance to planets visited by Starfleet in the past. Captain Freeman was worried about her daughter Beckett, making the Cerritos look bad, so she ordered her not to speak to FNN under any circumstances. Beckett then did an interview behind her mother's back, and the captain was so mad that she transferred her off the ship onto the dreaded Starbase 80. Once the FNN story aired, Freeman realised that Beckett had actually given a very charitable interview, which she probably would have known if she just bothered to ask. Of course, Beckett wasn't eager to accept her apology after the fact, choosing instead to run off with Picard's contracted archaeologist friend Petra Aberdeen. The rest of the crew were taken out of context, and the FNN expose nearly led to the entire California class being decommissioned. Beckett and her mother made amends at the end of the next episode, but kicking her daughter off the ship was definitely one of Captain Freeman's most embarrassing moments. The whole crew had to say goodbye to their friend because Freeman was just too stubborn to hear her daughter out. Number 1. Janeway's reunion with Mark. Voyager's early return home to Earth led to celebrations all across the Federation. It was a wonderful time for the entire crew, but Captain Janeway may have had a bit of an awkward reunion with her ex-fiancé Mark. About 4 years after Voyager was lost, they were able to use the Hirogen subspace relay network to contact Starfleet in the episode Hunters, and the crew were finally able to contact their loved ones. Janeway was excited at first to speak to Mark once again, but her mood quickly changed when she learned what he had been up to while she was gone. Mark held out hope for longer than most, but eventually came to the conclusion that Janeway had died and decided to move on with his life. He was devastated to lose his fiancée, yet he went on to marry his co-worker only 6 months after Voyager was lost. Janeway was heartbroken, but understood that Mark needed to move on eventually, although getting married to another woman only 6 months later was a tad surprising. We can imagine that Janeway and Mark's reunion after Endgame was far less romantic than she hoped. This is especially sad when you rewatch the episode Elogium, when Janeway told Chakotay she intended to get home before Mark gave her up for dead. That was 10 awkward things that must have happened after Star Trek episodes. If you can think of anything else that we missed and you really can't keep it to yourself, yourself, let us know down in the comments. You can find us on Twitter at TrekCulture and on Instagram at TrekCultureYT. You can find myself on Twitter at TomCFinn and on various other socials as well. I've even talked to some of the Trek Culture gang on my podcast, Creative Roots with TC Roberts Finn, so be sure to check that out too. Thanks all for watching, and until next time, bye bye.